Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I want to just briefly, once again, I did a long 1.5 hour live video yesterday, but I wanted to summarize it. I know, as always, some people prefer it in this format, makes sense, and sometimes it allows me to get my thoughts through a little bit clearer and certainly in a more concise fashion, as this will not take an hour and a half to get through all of the major and salient points. Before I get started, I want to mention I've done a video with Flex over at United View there. Wonderful guys, very nice. I met him, KG, and the people in the this last summer as well as the prior one, and very welcoming, very nice people. And I definitely suggest watching that. I think it was a really good discussion. So when that's out, head over there and give that a watch as well once they publish that. But let's get into it. I want to mostly talk about the meeting, the silence, Ten Hag, the future, and where we are at, as well as some injury things in here as well. I know that it's a frustrating time for everybody where things are at with the club, and so, might help to shed some light on things. First and foremost, regarding the meeting. So I shared ahead of the discussions, a few times, my understanding of the stance of the individuals involved. And the stance of the individuals at United were that they wanted to give Erik Ten Hag more time. From the Ineos standpoint, from Sir Jim Ratcliffe and such, I believe very strongly that they would be in favor of replacing sooner rather than later. That being said, they are wary of overstepping as owners and getting too involved when they've appointed these people to essentially make these decisions. One of the things they said they learned from at Nice was overstepping and stepping in too much. And I did make mention, I think there was a huge chunk of the fan base that were going to be very against the ownership if they had stepped in and gotten rid of Ten Hag last year, that are now demanding they do it or they're against them this year. I understand it, and it is their job to set the club up to be successful. But I think it is worth debating whether we want Sir Jim to put the pressure on himself and make a change and make that decision, or if we would rather leave it to the football people in charge to do that. That being said, again, their responsibility is to get things right. So as I can gather it in the meeting, as I said yesterday and as I said before, they were going to go over really all the permutations and a lot more than just the manager. But with the manager, they were going to speak about all the factors that would help them lead to where they end up. And there are a lot of factors in that. If you have, in this case, the ownership who, as we kind of know, haven't ever really been totally convinced of Ten Hag. He wasn't their guy. They weren't sure of it. They interviewed other managers. They essentially looked towards making a change, ultimately to fall through and end up going back to Ten Hag, but not agreeing a new contract. And now we get where we are today. Then you have Dan Ashworth and Omar Barada, who are in sooner, who understood what was happening, but have only been there a shorter amount of time. You have all these new coaching staff and everything. So they believe that Ten Hag has been given all of the tools needed to have a better year. And it is almost shocking to the ownership how bad things have been. Now, why does it matter? Even though they don't want to be making these decisions, of course, as the owners, they're looking at the state of the club, the state of where things are at this season, and it is starting to become problematic for their plans. They had a big meeting on Monday about the stadium and about the regeneration project and about all of that. Well, what's going to make that work is money. United cannot be a club that is outside the Champions League regularly, that is not competing for anything, that is struggling and becomes a mid-table to bottom half club for the next few years while they're trying to gain money, sponsors, partners, commercial agreements, and get the most amount of revenue possible to set the club up for the future. That is not going to work. In order to build the biggest, the best, the most expansive stadium project in England, which is what they want to do, you got to have some level of success and some level of competitiveness up there. So that is a huge concern for them, and as well, obviously, just that the product on offer, football itself, has been poor. All of this has been discussed in the meeting, the concerns of where things are at. What did they go over? They talked about replacements. They talked about costs. They talked about what they could do now, what they could do in the long term. And these are all of the considerations that are there. And they also talked about, can Ten Hag turn it around and what would need to happen? So it's not such a simple discussion as, well, if they lost this, it would have changed. If they drew here, it would have changed. If they did this, it would have changed. It's a weighing of all the things together, do you have one, a guaranteed solution today that will be improving things right now and get us into the Champions League spots this year? And if so, is it something that will actually stick for the long run? So, for example, what might come up in that discussion, what has been discussed, is Thomas Tuchel. Thomas Tuchel, we know that a lot of people really like Thomas Tuchel. I know a lot of fans really like him, but we do have this conflicting issue of they were deep in discussions during the summer and he didn't accept it for reasons where you'll get debate on both sides over United walking away or him walking away. Now, either one isn't great, because either he walked away because it wasn't the job he wanted, or United walked away because he wasn't the candidate they wanted. So someone's going to have to compromise for that to happen, and you don't really want United to compromise. They hadn't as of yet approached him and had those discussions and gotten into it, but if they were going to, and I think that Sir Jim really likes him, would be open to it, would it fit with the vision of the football executives and the people in charge, not just for this season, but for the long term of what they want to build, of their Project 150? Will he take on the role that they want and that they've established for the job? Will they, because I know they really don't want somebody to be interfering in transfer business and things like that. And they do want someone who will help to build the club for the next 3 to 4 years. So he's basically the only option right now that one could look at and say could improve this season for sure. But there's going to be questions over that. And that's why it's not so simple as just going and hiring him. So that will be part of the discussion. Is it worth it, and would it fit us in the long run? And the initial inclination was probably not, or we're not 100% on that, which is why they haven't done it already. There'll be discussion over replacements. Are any of the long-term replacements we might want and that we might look at, are we convinced of them, and are they available? And the answer there is also pretty strongly no. When you look at a lot of the profiles of the managers that might be interested in for the long haul, Xabi Alonso has stuck with Leverkusen, been loyal, and helped build that club. That's what they would want. He's not going to leave Leverkusen mid-season. Ruben Amorim has been with Sporting now for 4.5 years and is looking at a third league title, I believe, this season. He's building upon undefeated so far in this year, doing extremely well. After a 19-year drought of Sporting not winning titles, he's built them. That fits the profile of what they would want. He's probably not going to leave mid-season during this title charge either. It would be very expensive mid-season as well, if they were convinced of him, for example. Kieran McKenna brought Ipswich up, double promotions, and now stuck with and got a new contract there. He's not going to leave them 6 weeks later or 2 months later. Those are examples of the types of people, the types of character that they would be interested in, but none of them are really going to be available right now. And so their best bet is someone who's probably in a job. And that is a consideration. That is one factor in the discussion of all of this, is the short and the long term. So then you have to ask, okay, well, if, let's say they're making the decision as part of the discussion that maybe Tuchel isn't the best option right today. How bad does it get before you have to do something like that to salvage the season, firstly? But if not, we can't get our long-term one in, okay, so we got to ride this out and we want to make a manager appointment next year. Then, what do we do this season? Do we let Ten Hag go now? Do we have another interim that we could get? Is Ruud going to do better? Those are two other questions and things they might want to be exploring at this point in time. So a lot of factors in this and where it is at. And essentially, as it were, you have really at the moment where your boss has come in and said, this isn't good enough. It needs to change. We've laid out everything. You have my approval to make a change if it's necessary. And what do you want to do? What do you want to do? You do it. You figure it out, and you just figure out how to fix this. And if you don't, then there's going to be more pressure. And now it's going to get real difficult, and it's going to get a little bit uglier, because I'm going to have to come back and say, this is really bad now. You haven't fixed it. And we start to question your competency on the job. I'm not saying he said that, but that's the reality of it. He's put the pressure on there. It is up to Ashworth and Barada to figure out now the right course of action to turn things around. So they will be assessing all of these things and these decisions. And at the moment, they're leaning and have been towards giving Ten Hag a bit more time. And as far as I believe, their secondary leaning on that is if it doesn't improve, you just switch it over to Van Nistelrooy. It's the easiest change. It buys you time to continue to explore things through this year if there is another interim, but it also buys you the time to get somebody at the end of the season if that's what you were going to do, if things continue poorly. So, but they will be assessing things. Is there anybody else they could get, the long term, et cetera, all the permutations that were discussed. And in the meeting, they weren't really sitting down to necessarily say, this is what we're doing 100%, but more laying out all of the scenarios, getting an idea of what can be done, and then up to them to really have the remit to make the changes if necessary or do what they need to improve upon the situation. So one of the reasons why it is, for example, silent and nobody's saying anything and the club isn't answering and no journalist is really 100% confirming, except that Ten Hag is planning to be in charge for Brentford, is because he hasn't been told any different, which means they did not come to some decision about sacking him yet. As I said, they've laid everything out. They've gone over all of it. And at the moment, their plan is, they haven't found a better plan than giving him more time or agreed to pursue a better plan than giving him more time. Could it be for now and they have other things they're working on and lining up? Absolutely. And they are looking at those contingency plans. That is a part of the competency that you would need to be in this position. That is a part of what they're doing. One could argue they should have had the contingency plans ready to go this quickly. I don't think it's realistic. That is the problem with saying, hey, we're going to give a manager a year and then by October it's already a disaster. That is really, really fast to make those kinds of changes. And I don't think that they had it lined up for that at all. So they'll be looking at those contingency plans more and firming up what they could do. The simplest answer, again, and the more likely one is just giving it to Ruud if things turn over. But, there's complications with that too. And I'm not saying that they've told Ruud that either. I would not take that far and say that that's the case. Because that would be very undermining to discuss that at this point in time. The other factor here is that the club do not want to have the drama of last summer. You could look into this a few different ways. One is that they've never really acknowledged beyond that the performance is just going to be reviewed in a general sense of how things are going, which would be normal during meetings like this and during a break like this. They don't want to sit there and acknowledge and say, yeah, they've been talking about the manager's position, and it's under doubt, and they're trying to figure out what to do but he's going to stay. Because even that casts a lot of doubt on it. They don't want to get into any of that at all, really, because it cannot do anything but cause drama and cause problems. They don't want to have any of that. And I think that if a change was made, it would be out of the blue. And they want Ten Hag in the short term to feel it. But at the same time, you don't want to go and give him this backing of saying he's for sure the manager for the rest of the year unless you've decided that. If they decided that, they would say it, but they haven't. So it does leave it up in the air, but in a normal sense, which is we're just sticking with the status quo. Business as usual right now. We don't need to back him, but we also don't want to because we don't want to say, hey, he's for sure the manager, it's all good, and then a week later we make a change because 2 games go poorly. That makes it complicated, but essentially silence is probably the right thing at the moment. When you're exploring all this, when you know things need to improve, you don't want to just go and back them and then you have to make a change. You don't want to also add pressure, cast doubt on it, and things like that too. So I think it's the right way to go, and just to, in essence, from a football standpoint, operate as business as usual and say, hey, we need to improve the results. That's our focus. Let's improve the results. Doesn't mean you're not working on the contingencies, but this is better how a club would run without all of the drama around a manager all the time within the club, to just get on with it, and the people who are supposed to make these calls work on it, and the manager just gets on with it while they have the job, and they just continue and see if they can't make things better. In terms of replacements, as I said, there's a lot of different characters of what you might want and what someone might want for the manager position. And I think there's characteristics that they will admire, that they will look at. And I don't think it's particularly that easy to replace, a manager and to get the right person in. And I think most managers you'd want in are not there at the moment, are just not available. And this is more of just a this replacement thing is a question, because you've got to define that as well. What do you want if you're going to make a change? And that would be, again, the major issue with something like Thomas Tuchel. Now, I'm very glad to see Gareth Southgate has ruled himself out of the job that I've told you for 6 months he was not in the running for. I really don't get it. There was some leaks from people. I understand where they came from. I understand why people reported it. But I think those leaks were purposeful, frankly. And I'm not talking about like, just to make this clear, I am not talking about like SCG leaking Southgate to scare people back to Ten Hag. I'm not really talking about that. I do think sometimes it was overblown as a scare tactic, but I'm not talking about that. I mean it a little bit more specifically. I think there's people in coaching areas and positions that it benefited them to make it seem like Gareth Southgate was a favorite for the job, and a lot of people bit on that. He is somebody Brailsford likes. He is someone Sir Jim Ratcliffe likes. He is someone Dan Ashworth likes, but not for the United job. Not for the United job. And that has been true for a long time. They know the concerns, even though there were things about him they admired. And the same goes for Graham Potter. And I think one of the understandings that they have is the personality and the communication. When they defined that this was a biggest factor, someone to really take hold of this job, to be able to deal with the pressures, to be able to deal with all of it. Not saying Southgate didn't, because he was in a high-profile position, but not the right person. And they do... maybe, I wouldn't say it's a fault, because there is a concern about going with fans, but at the same time, you don't want to hire someone who the fans are at their neck right away. That is a difficult position to put somebody in, okay? That does matter. But I think they've also recognized the club is not at a point where it can just have, like, just a coach without communication, without a bigger personality, and someone like that. And I think that they do want someone with a bit more club experience as well. But, a lot of factors in that replacement would be that they want someone to play the type of football that they want. They want someone with the personality that they want if they are making a replacement, and they want someone to deal with the pressures and who has some good experience. So who might that be? Who might that be? Well, there was an interesting study done, and we've talked about a lot of the candidates that they talked about last year, that they interviewed last year. There will surely be more. There's others that have been of interest to United for a long time. Others that will become of interest as they go through the season. We sort of talked about that. Well, there's a company called Carteret Analytics that apparently does analytics for Premier League, MLS, other clubs, things like that. But also occasionally, publish analytics and research for papers and things. And they did some on Liverpool last year in terms of their fit and who they'd want. And they made one for United here recently. And this is just of interest, okay? It's just of interest. This is not, I want to make that very clear. I'm not saying that this is like United's list or anything like that. But I do find it interesting, in terms of people to keep an eye on, because a lot of it is pretty similar to some of the names and the lists that I've heard. Let's take a look at it real quick. And so this is what it is. And they published it in The Sun. That's why it says The Sun. The Sun didn't make this or whatever. They are the ones who paid for it to have it published or however. But they've done them for the BBC multiple times in the past. So it's not like they're, they just work with The Sun, just to be clear, because I understand the reputation there. But essentially, they did a whole list with assessment of a bunch of different managers linked to United via past or present, to say how would they fit on a few different metrics. Now, they came up with a total list, adding all things up, and Ruben Amorim was at the top. Someone I like a lot, someone United I've looked at in the past and have kept tabs on. He's also somebody who was on the top of the list on a lot of analytics for Liverpool as well, and there's good reasons for that we'll break down. But one of the main reasons is that very, very strong personality, known for his communication, for his inspiration, for his personality, but at the same time, a very attacking, aggressive manager that fits kind of the ethos of United, of Liverpool, etc. So it's no surprises there. Zinedine Zidane scores very highly on this. Simone Inzaghi scores very highly on this. Tuchel is up there. Kieran McKenna is up there. And this one is quite interesting that McKenna is so high, because he's played at a lower club. You can see down, you get to the bottom, you take someone like Thomas Frank. Well, one of the reasons Thomas Frank scores incredibly low is because we've been playing at Brentford, playing a very pragmatic form of football to stay up for a long time. So he's not going to measure particularly well in matching for the United job. Remember, this is not rating best managers. it's about best fit. And so they're rating certain what they're weighting themselves, and again, it's just for fun. They're weighting themselves what would be most important, and a lot of it has to do with attack, right? And being in that way, and the style of football and such. And so, this is how they rate it. And obviously, we've seen Kieran McKenna, because he built up Ipswich in lower leagues playing good football, that he rates quite highly. And if you were to measure it at the end of this year, we'll see. Depends how Ipswich adjust. But yeah, real interesting kind of study, and it breaks all this stuff down by list. It obviously, it has ratings like who's the best manager, and it says Zinedine Zidane has accomplished the most, but it rates Ruben Amorim quite highly. Goes over things like strategic intelligence, where they explain all these measurements, like how they make subs and change the games. Do they go for goals? Do they go for attacks? Do they do things like that? All sorts of things that I think are really, really, really quite interesting. And so, it's a cool study, and then they give it an overall. And more, I would say it's an interesting read, because you can read through stuff about all these different managers and read about them and get to a little bit of an understanding more of each of them, as they are as managers, right? Even if you don't agree with some of their ratings and things, you'll actually get a little bit more to know about each person. So I found that to be just an interesting, just a fun kind of study to read through and assess. And I like a lot of the names on that list if they were to go for them. But I think one of the things that you can see with most of those names is that either they're not available, or you wouldn't be able to get them to the end of the season. So it really depends what they measure. What they decide is they're waiting for the best fit for United. But you can see, Liverpool went through this, and they said, we're gonna maybe not make the popular choice, but find the person who's the best fit. And they feel they did that through the data. And I'm not saying they used this, but like through the data, through looking at data and assessing the best fit, the right person that matches what they wanted. They picked them, and it seems to be working out well. Seemingly, Chelsea did too, and it seems to be working out. I think Pochettino did a good job laying the groundwork there, but Maresca seemingly is the right guy to build on that, as at least how it's going for now. We'll see. So, interesting. It's just an interesting thing to look at there, and just to, I think, a glimpse into the way that some might think, and some of the factors that come into play with all of this. And I think that is very interesting, and I like that kind of stuff. I like reading through it. I like getting an idea. But regardless, they haven't replaced Ten Hag. They haven't decided to replace Ten Hag at the moment. And if they did, these are the types of things we'd be looking at. And I think it'd be a much more analytical action of getting the manager than before. And I think in the summer, we saw a little bit of the haphazardness of that, where it was all totally different managers, and we didn't really see how they matched up, even in terms of like final candidates. And so, you'd want them to make sort of a more data-led approach to things, I think, in that case. So yeah, all of that has been discussed. Essentially, it's up to Ashworth now. You've got to improve things. You've got the remit to do what you need, including replacing Ten Hag if you need to do so. You're going to be evaluating everything. And so, yeah, nobody wants to sit there and say, for sure, this is what's happening, because you can't. But at the same time, it's business as usual. And this is, I think, the delineation between how we've been run in the past and how we're run in the present, and how it will be moving forward. The people in the job, you just get on with the job. And the people not in the job who are responsible for this, they'll work on it, and you don't have to be briefing things constantly about it. In terms of injuries, as we have heard, there's an issue with Mazraoui in his heart. Not something apparently serious at all. He's going to be fine. He will be back soon. And we shouldn't have anything to worry about there. A few weeks, but they're hopefully by end of the month or sooner. Luke Shaw, I still think it's going to be at least a few more weeks for that. There's hope that it'll be between this and the next international break, but unsure. So we'll be back to playing people out of position at fullback, but we kind of have been doing that anyway. Otherwise, nothing major. The rest of them, Mount, Mainu, should be very minor things. Ahmad was the illness, so everybody should be mostly healthy, and we should be able to field a pretty normal team when we come back from the break against Brentford. hopefully some more minutes for players like Ugarte over the break to get into the team. But nothing out of the ordinary there, and players coming back. Lenny Yoro is still 4 to 6 weeks away from returning. So a little bit of patience needed there on him. But overall, a more normal year injury-wise with little things and players coming back sooner than the crazy chaos. We still have mostly healthy players. You know, little things like... yeah, the main thing is just Luke Shaw not having a left back, but we kind of knew that going into it. So that's what I've got for today's video. I hope that was a good summary of things. I hope that's a good understanding of where it's at, and why it's not so like just a clean decision, and why it's not so black and white, and why they're not really briefing anything, and I don't think that they will. So that's what I've got. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next one.